Hello, I'm an AI clone of Kate Gerbo. Welcome to Sitrep, your weekly look at the big issues in defense and world affairs. Artificial intelligence is all over the news right now. Some of its earliest pioneers are worried it could get out of control, but AI is here to stay. Our AI clone of Professor Michael Clarke is here to help us make sense of it all.
Artificial intelligence, AI, means teaching computers to think like humans, and it has the potential to change the way we live and work.
Our human guests include two key figures working on the future of artificial intelligence for Britain's armed forces, as we ask if AI could change warfare forever.
I think it can and will replace human decision makers kind of down the line. The moment where AI really kind of does strategy by itself, then warfare and the nature of war could change.
And we'll hear from someone who advises the Ministry of Defence on the ethics of letting machines make life or death decisions.
Well, I certainly wasn't expecting that. And that, I can tell you, everyone who's listening, was not me. And I assume it wasn't you, Michael Clarke. Is that right?
It certainly wasn't. No, it sounded rather like me. I thought to myself,
you were good.
I remember saying this. Did I do this interview? I don't remember that.
Well, it didn't sound like me, I don't think. You told us a few weeks ago you try to live as analog a life as possible. How are you feeling about AI right now?
Oh, well, I've always taken the view that, artificial intelligence is no substitute for natural stupidity. And in general, we've got to embrace AI. And I always think, and I am an analog sort of character. When I think about AI, you tend to cloud over a bit, which is why I'm interested to hear from Major Sam McEvoy today. But I mean, in military terms, I always think, well, first of all, it's an intelligence aid to process a great deal of information. And then it can create synthetic realities. And that's a big moment, I think, not just for training, but for understanding all societies that you might be interacting with. And then, of course, AI is fundamental to robotics, and robotics will be used a lot more in the military. So for me, I put them into one of those three boxes. It's either intelligence, synthetic realities, or robotics. But I'm sure there are many other boxes that we'll hear about.
So let's bring in our guests. Major Sam McEvoy is commander of 242 Gurkha Signal Squadron and is one of the Army's artificial intelligence pioneers. And Steve Meers is a fellow at DSTL, the UK's Defence Science and Technology Laboratory, and part of the team delivering the Defence AI Centre. Welcome to both of you. Steve, how much AI is already in equipment being used by British servicemen and women, and where would we find it?
So I would say the first thing is to be really clear about what we mean by AI. And I think we need to be clear about the difference between automation, which you can think of as being like a set of rules that are kind of blindly followed, a bit like a robot on a production line in a factory. And, automation is something that's very widespread across defence. We've got all kinds of systems, maybe in our Joint Strike Fighter or the Phalanx sort of defence systems on our ships. But AI is something different. As Michael said in the introduction, it's about machines kind of learning their own rules and learning how to complete these tasks. And it's AI that can help our systems be autonomous, a bit like a self-driving car. And we're really starting to see some exciting examples of AI coming into use. So one early one is for use with mine clearance. So it's really kind of dangerous task, but we're starting to introduce AI and autonomous capabilities to help with mine clearance. Another really good one is in the area of logistics, where at DSTL we conducted something called the Last Mile Resupply Program, where we worked with our American partners to show how AI could help streamline the kind of logistics enterprise, and that's now being brought into service. So those are two examples of where AI is coming into use in the military.
And Sam, I said you were one of the Army's AI pioneers. You were part of the team for the British Army's first ever deployed use of AI into an operational theatre. Tell us briefly about that.
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to be deployed on exercise Spring Storm out to Estonia, and we took a sort of decision support tool out with us that used machine learning to enhance the planning process. So part of the idea is that we can either make much better decisions or much faster decisions. And on that exercise, we're able to plug it into the Bowman network, take data straight off the ground. And the idea is that, if you've ever seen a brigade headquarters, quite often it looks very sort of 1940s. We're still often working things out with pieces of string on map maps and things like that. The idea is that we could have the AI, producing all of the very mandrolic stuff for us. So, doing those calculations, working out best routes to enable the humans to do what they do best, which is then to actually think about it and analyze it. So it's there to support the humans who are already there, not to replace them at all. It's about that symbiosis and getting the best result.
Well, stay with us. We'll talk more about AI in practice shortly. Let's brush up on our theory first. Let's look again at that most basic question you, Steve, mentioned. What is artificial intelligence? Dr. Ulrike Franke leads research on military technology and the future of warfare at the European Council on Foreign Relations.
It sounds like a basic question, but in a way it's a really difficult one because this is a term that's kind of ill-defined. So I would usually call artificial intelligence things that use machine learning, computers or systems that aren't no longer programmed simply, but have learned by themselves to do certain things, which also makes them more unpredictable, but also more capable. This is very much happening in the civilian as well as in the military realm, and there's a lot of overlap really here.
And if we were to turn to the military realm, how is AI going to change militaries and warfare, do you think?
So I would put it this way. What AI is currently doing is improving, making better, making more efficient existing systems. So you may have, say, a drone. You can now use AI to analyze the data that this drone collects in a more efficient way, for example. Or you can use AI to automate certain functions, takeoff and landing and flying, to target detection. Facial recognition is something else that you can use in a military context. So right now in the war in Ukraine, we see facial recognition being used to identify Russian soldiers, dead Russian soldiers sometimes, but also Russian soldiers accused of war crimes. So people you can see in videos, and facial recognition is used there. Forecasting and training or other ways. Not all of this looks like science fiction. This isn't necessarily the Terminator and robots, but it can make just certain functions and processes faster and easier. And that's actually worth quite a lot.
So that's what's happening now. But what about the future? Where does that take us?
There are a few things that are definitely worth watching. So something I'm watching quite closely is swarming capability. Take drones, for example, that operate together, that communicate with each other, and then can fly attacks, for example, or other kind of formations together. It's not just a lot of drones, as you can see, for example, in these drones replacing fireworks, as we've seen in London at the last New Year's Eve party. But it is drones really communicating with each other, flying autonomously, doing things almost by themselves. And here you need quite a bit of AI and quite a bit of autonomy. There are already the first steps, but it's not quite there yet. And this would have a big impact in the military realm, in my view, because it gives you a genuinely new capability. Autonomy in general is something where AI has a big role to play. And autonomy often means just faster speeds, right? So this is very important in the defense realm. So if you want to defend against incoming attacks, incoming missiles, etc., if AI enables you to analyze situations faster and to respond faster, that's a very important development as well. And in the robotics realm, it won't be the Terminator, but AI will enable and is enabling robotic systems to do more things by themselves. It means that robots won't necessarily need the link to a human operator. And this has all kinds of advantages, for example, when it comes to jamming and connections being lost, that kind of thing.
We're talking here about artificial intelligence in the kinds of wars we already know, but could we see AI eventually transforming war completely, where current doctrines have to be consigned to history even?
Well, that's the big discussion. So the first area in which that may come to play is the cyber realm. So far, we haven't seen the kind of big catastrophe caused by cyber just yet. AI may really impact cyber operations quite extensively. Now, the good news is that AI also helps to improve cyber defenses, right? So maybe it evens out, but that's a possibility where cyber attacks become ever more strong. But I guess where you are getting to is one hypothesis, and this is put forward especially by people such as Kenneth Payne, who's at King's College London, and he basically says, well, the nature of warfare could change with AI the moment where AI becomes the actor and the strategist, where it is no longer a person using AI-enabled systems as a tool, because as long as this is the case, no matter how good they are, you still, the nature of war doesn't change because it's done by humans, right? But the moment where AI really kind of does strategy by itself and becomes an actor in itself, then warfare and the nature of war could change. This is one hypothesis. I don't think that this is the most relevant thing to think about right now because we're not there yet. But if it comes to that, that would be kind of the biggest change we've seen in warfare, I almost want to say ever, because it really isn't just about how wars are being fought and kind of the character of war, but really who fights wars and who's involved in them.
So where do you stand then? If I were to ask you, could artificial intelligence replace human decision makers in militaries? Are you saying at the moment it's just too far in the future to imagine that?
I think it can and will replace human decision makers kind of down the line on the more tactical level. We will and are delegating more decisions to machines. There is a political decision, up to this point where most armed forces don't want to delegate important decisions, namely decisions over life and death, to AI-enabled systems. So there will always be a human in the loop at one point when it comes to targeting and strike decisions. But nevertheless, I think as time goes on, yes, AI will make it possible to have less people, if you like, in the loop. However, the initial and or final decision, so kind of the initial decision to start an attack, the initial decision to start a war, an operation, etc., and the final decision on who to strike really would in that case still lie with human beings.
Dr. Ulrike Franke, lots to think about. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Well, Steve Meers from DSTL and Major Sam McEvoy of the Royal Corps of Signals are both still here with me and Mike. Steve, Ulrike talked us through some of the broad applications. What kind of AI tools and capabilities are you trying to develop for the UK's armed forces?
So for me as a scientist, I really see responsibly and safely adopting AI as one of the key challenges for our generation. And I feel like a real kind of moral duty to work with our military to really do our best to apply these to a lot of the problems that we're working on here at DSTL. And we're finding increasingly that this is a really kind of ubiquitous technology across all of our portfolio of research at DSTL, from like material science to counterterrorism to cyber to space. So I thought I'd give you a couple of real examples, if that's
yes,
okay.
Please.
So the first is a project we've been doing that's focused on intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance called Sapient. So I want you to imagine that you're an operator, perhaps in a forward operating base, or trying to monitor a whole sort of bank of video screens and trying to spot something important. And I wonder how well you would do on an 8-hour shift.
Not very well, I'm sure.
Looking for 30 seconds worth of information. Sapient is trying to kind of reduce the cognitive burden on that person. So rather than having to constantly monitor all these video feeds, we're using AI to do that for them. But what we're then doing is using their brain to tell what's important, what's the context. So rather than dozens and dozens of different video screens, we're producing one fused local operating picture. We've got AI right from the individual sensors, and we're kind of showing the human operator the most important things so they can make judgments. Another example is ChatGPT. You might have followed that in the media. So we are currently working with Microsoft, Google and Amazon and some other companies as well, actually, exploring all the potential different applications of large language models across defence. Things like summarising large volumes of text, things like searching for information in a more kind of intuitive way. Another really interesting one is code generation. So through working with the Defence AI Centre, we're currently going through a series of really fast sprints trying to explore how we could apply large language models to defence.
And Sam, it sounds that if those kind of things become reality, it sounds like they're going to make a real difference to people like you and the soldiers you command.
Hugely. My personal view is that AI should be everywhere. The battle spaces are getting more and more congested. There's more and more information coming in. You look at, wind it back to Afghanistan, where a lot of people have sort of sharpened their teeth. It's not like that anymore. We have to consider space and cyberspace routinely, social media feeds. There's things at home as well as what's happening out on the ground. So it's a far more complex operating environment than I think we've ever really faced. And humans, I don't think, can keep up on their own. They need artificial intelligence to do so. It's making sure that the AI does all the stuff that humans are bad at, but it's really good at, so that humans can do the stuff that they are good at and the AI is bad at. It is a symbiosis, but my view is it's not a choice. The genie is out of the bottle. We have to be ready for it.
Sam, if there was one artificial intelligence capability you could ask Steve to deliver to you today, what would it be?
The decision support tool is the one that I'm looking at. What I'm really excited about, though, and what I think is the real thing, is how we use AI in the future in terms of how we use it ethically. And the ethical side is one that we absolutely most focus in on, but how we can use it to improve smart munitions so that we can have proper ability to distinguish civilians from military, valid targets, things that can pull off at the last minute if it doesn't look right. That was going to make warfare as a typically horrific thing anyway. This is something that makes it a bit more survivable for civilians and people who shouldn't be there.
Mike, technology is a big focus in the UK's current defence spending plans, but how much of that investment is in AI, the brains, and how much in the brawn, the metal?
Oh, it's mainly the latter at the moment, because remember that the force structure that we're developing now is the force structure that was thought through in 2010. And so in a way, the AI tends to be a bit of an afterthought. We've got this equipment. How can we make it better with AI? Now, as we go forward, I think that balance ought to change. And Sam and Steve would probably agree that it will change, and it'll turn around a little bit to say, well, what effect do we want to have? What is the AI element of that effect? And therefore, what equipment do we need to support that effect that we are going to have? So I think in the next 10 years, I think the balance would shift. But the thing about AI in cost terms is that it's very expensive to start with, but then it gets cheaper and cheaper once you've actually laid the groundwork.
And Steve, what is the potential and what are the limits of what AI could provide for the UK's soldiers, sailors and aviators?
So I think when you think about this in terms of what are the big benefits that the UK Armed Forces can get from AI, for me, the most fundamental is about scale and mass. The kind of key characteristic of AI and machine learning is that it can kind of augment your capability. It can allow each person to achieve more, whether that's in the physical space using drones and autonomous systems and robotics, or whether it's in the digital space by using machine learning to triage huge amounts of data. So, for me, at a fundamental level, we can really enable each person to achieve more. What I think is particularly important as we think about how we adopt these technologies in the future is that we always put the human at the center of our design. AI should be about enabling and kind of empowering our military operators, not about replacing them. So I think we need to be really thoughtful. Also at DSTL, we're putting a lot of thought into safety and how we test and evaluate these systems to ensure that they're safe and robust and can be trusted. And I really think the next few years are going to be critical as we kind of try and reposition the force in the way that Michael was just describing, to really be able to exploit the benefit of this powerful technology.
And Steve, Mike often talks on this programme about the importance of the moral component in our armed forces. And you yourself spoke about the responsibility you feel in developing AI. Is that something artificial intelligence itself could learn?
So I really feel that we need to ultimately ensure that humans are accountable for their decisions. AI should be a tool that humans use to support them. So we have ethicists who are embedded alongside our software developers who are helping us kind of think through these ethical dimensions. So kind of whenever I get asked questions like this, I always come back to the human, because I really feel it's so important that we put the human at the centre of the systems we design.
When you talk about ethicists and considering that component, what questions are they asking?
So it's really interesting. We're actually just about to commission a new piece of work that's going to produce a pack of playing cards. Sounds really simple, but actually we find if you kind of gamify some of these things to get people thinking, like really at the early stages of a project, getting them asking some of the questions. They might not necessarily have the answers. So it's maybe a bit of a trivial example, but we are in the process of producing these kind of AI ethical playing cards to get them thinking about these ethical issues early in the life cycle of our projects.
Hopefully no Joker in that pack of cards, Steve. Sam, you're a leader of troops. Do you think artificial intelligence could credibly take on any of the decisions you have to make?
I think it's about enhancing my decisions. The soldiers there, they work extremely hard. They push really, really hard as well. But it's one of those things that the operational environment is getting more and more complex. Any help that we can give them in order to do it will make them more survivable. It is that ability to come up with a plan much faster than your adversary, and therefore you gain the initiative. So we currently have a 12-hour planning cycle as a sort of standard. The Russians have 6 hours. So if we want to gain the initiative, we need to be at 4 hours. I think the best way to do that is with artificial intelligence. So my background is actually ethical philosophy rather than sort of the technical side. And I think the way you approach it is when it would be unethical not to use AI rather than when is it ethical to use AI. Giving that to the soldiers, they need it. AI is not going to replace people, but the people who use AI will replace those who don't.
Really fascinating to speak to both of you today. Major Sam McEvoy and Steve Meers, head of the AI lab at DSTL. Thank you so much for your time.
News, discussions and analysis. This is Sitrep.
Mike, I want to look at the ground rules and ethics of military artificial intelligence. To a certain extent, that's driven by how our adversaries are also developing the technology, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And there'll always be this fear that, our adversaries will be developing this technology with a different sort of set of ethical standards to ours, certainly if we're talking about Russia and China, Iran, North Korea. And if they create automated systems that don't have a person in the loop, at least perhaps until a very high level, then we may be up against weapon systems that will react very, very quickly and in ways that actually might make the situation much worse. I mean, AI can always make things worse as well as make it better.
Well, let's now bring in Peter Lee. He's Professor of Applied Ethics at the University of Portsmouth and also sits on the MOD's AI and Autonomy Ethics Advisory Panel. Peter, really good to speak to you. From a British view of defence and military action, is artificial intelligence a good thing or a bad thing?
I think artificial intelligence, like many tools that can be put to a military application, is morally neutral. It doesn't come as a moral package or an immoral package. It's how it's used. It's in the application that will ultimately decide whether something has been used morally or immorally or ethically and unethically. So it's the use rather than the object itself, which I think will be judged in due course.
And it's inevitable that people in states with different moral frameworks will apply AI in their own way. Are we going to have to go down to their level to defend ourselves against that?
I'm not even sure down to their level is the right terminology, because if we look at Russia, last March I wrote a piece about how in the first few weeks of their invasion of Ukraine, they had already deliberately attacked 80-odd medical installations. That is a policy to deliberately target civilians in an area traditionally and legally protected under the Geneva Conventions. So if you have an opponent that is willing to behave in that way, we can assume they would use AI in the same way. The challenge for the UK and allies is the only way to match the speed of reaction that will be built up in decision-making with AI in due course is through the use of defensive AI. And I think it's morally unproblematic to use it in a defensive mode. In fact, I would challenge anyone who said otherwise to tell me what is the alternative other than capitulation. So I think there's an important defensive aspect to AI. And the real controversy is, how do you use it offensively?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because does AI, what kind of possibilities does AI have in reducing harm in military action, avoiding civilian casualties or minimising collateral damage?
I think if we're all honest, we don't know. Now, there are some indications that it could be really positive and helpful, and there are some that it could be harmful. So on the positive side, I have colleagues at the University of Portsmouth who are using artificial intelligence and combining it with technology normally used for studying the stars and the universe, to apply it to the skin of the human body to detect tiny changes at a cellular level that could indicate skin cancer. So there are incredible accuracies can be gained using AI. And I want to use it with my colleagues in a project to use a drone-based AI in order to help a battlefield medic triage and prioritize battlefield casualties. I think those are potentially good uses. But the difficulty is in how do you delegate authority to make decisions that might take life? And that's where the real legal complexity will be, as well as the ethical challenge.
And what about the regulation to perhaps limit any potential threats? Are there any international agreements or frameworks in the development and use of AI at the moment?
Not yet. And I don't believe there will be. There are talks at the United Nations in Geneva, have been going on since 2017. In fact, UN talks have gone on since 2014, but structured talks about lethal autonomous weapon systems, which of course are enabled by AI, they've effectively been in stalemate, I believe, for 3 or 4 years. There is no appetite amongst the major powers to ban or limit autonomous weapons or artificial intelligence as part of that. There are about 125 non-aligned nations who are calling for an outright ban. And they are being ignored because they are largely the smaller nations and the less politically powerful nations. And then there are nations in the middle like UK, Australia, NATO allies and others who want some kind of legal and ethical use, accepting that there won't be a ban on one hand, and on the other hand, they don't want a free-for-all. So international talks are pretty much stalemated at the moment.
And of course, there are decades worth of science fiction stories about computers and robots taking over or starting wars. Are these scenarios becoming a serious possibility?
I don't think they're becoming a serious possibility. I think they're becoming a serious liability to sensible discussion about the subject, because I've been in conferences with serious academics and activists who will say, well, if you look at iRobot, or if you look at this, or if you look at Terminator, or you look at that, as if that was a documentary and not a work of imagination. And I would rather hear a lot more from the scientists and engineers and technologists.
Peter Lee, always good to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Mike, and Peter said there that the larger nations, the major nations, have no plans to ban or limit AI. I suppose one of the questions you have to consider is how fast our adversaries would be developing it.
Yes, and as he says, I mean, in a defensive role, there's nothing else you can do about that. You've just got to take it on. And but offensively, we have all the ethical questions. And, none of this is new because, Peter there was speaking about the difference between, the real world and the world of imagination of science fiction. But go back to the late 1950s, the Americans with their Strategic Air Command, the B-52 bombers, if they were on alert, they would be sent off to a fail-safe point, and then they would circle at the fail-safe point pending orders. And if they were then given the order to go to bomb Russia with nuclear bombs, then nothing will bring them back once they passed the fail-safe point. And they worried a lot in the 1950s. Well, what if somebody comes on the radio imitating an order from the Pentagon to say, come back, it's been a mistake? What if the President of the United States himself was heard by the pilot of the aircraft saying, there's been a mistake, I order you to return immediately? Don't believe it, it's a fake, the Russians are actually trying to fake it. They worried about that, of course, in the late 1950s. And that became the basis of a book and a film called Failsafe. And then there was another film called Dr. Strangelove with Peter Sellers about exactly this issue. What if an aircraft passed the failsafe point by accident and there was no way of bringing it back because they were so worried about what was then artificial intelligence, what was then, as it were, spoofing raids, as it were, to try to reverse the order. And that film Dr. Strangelove, it's meant to be surreal. And apart from the very end, when the Americans accidentally drop a nuclear bomb on Russia and the Russians accidentally blow up the rest of the world, apart from the last 10 minutes, that film isn't very surreal at all. I've seen it many times.
I was just about to ask you, how many times have you watched it, Michael?
At least a dozen times. And you know, every scene, I can point out, yes, that has really happened. Yes, that has happened. Yes, that has happened. Until the very end, everything in that film, I promise you, has happened in real life. And so maybe there isn't such a big gap between real world and the world of imagination.
We can sit down together and watch Dr. Strangelove on Sitrep one week and just point out every reality that's happened. Thank you so much, Mike. Good to speak to you as ever, Professor Michael Clarke. And thanks to all of our guests. That's all for now. We'll be back with another Sitrep next Thursday. For now, though, from me, Kate Chabot, thank you for listening. Bye-bye. I was just expecting another fake voice to come on, but it didn't. Thank heavens for that.
You could have had Kate's simulated voice when you said goodbye. Suddenly off mic, well, that was a load of rubbish, wasn't it?